Hello and welcome to CodeSlicing. In this episode, we're going to be combining layout guides. Now, up to this point, we've looked at all the different use cases for layout guides. Well, not all of them. I mean, they're infinite, okay? But we've looked at a lot of ways in which you can use them. But today, we're going to give the illusion that different parts of shapes are communicating with each other. In this time of social distancing, it's really important to keep communicating, right? And the same can be said for layout guides because they become much more powerful as a result. So hopefully this episode will open up another door that you can walk through to explore yet another room of possibilities. Right, before we begin, let me just take you through what we've got on the screen so far. I'm just taking this shape that we're going to be working with. I'm stroking it. I've got a frame around it. I'm showing layout guides, the one we're going to be using in particular, which I will explain in just a second. I'm making sure that we're showing layout guides. I'm putting a border around this shape so we can see the extent of the shape as we create this thing. I'm then putting a greedy frame around it so I can put a nice background color on it so it looks pretty. I'm also animating this. So it's got this linear animation that is going to rotate our wheel once every 4 seconds. And here you can see that my layout config has actually got 2 rings and 6 segments. And that's going to be important in just a minute, that we've got 2 rings and not just the outer ring. Now, I'm hoping that this is all going to be clear at this point. We've got 6 episodes behind us in the layout guide's journey. So we've done all of this before in one way or another. The only thing that I will mention is that in this case, on line 28, I'm rotating the config before laying it out, which is slightly different because usually we rotate the layout guide. They actually end up being the same thing, but in this case, we're rotating the config and then laying it out rather than rotating a layout guide. Why is that useful, I hear you ask? Well, just like in the episode we did for the Chrome icon, you can rotate the config before you lay it out, meaning that you can see the effect that has on your layout guide in your layout guide overlay. In this case, it doesn't make any difference, but I wanted to leave it in there to expose you to another feature of layout guides. So by changing this to that, right? If I play this, you see what I'm talking about. There we have our rotating wheel. If I move that up, exactly the same. And the other difference is that because I'm using PureSwiftUI 2 now, I don't have to declare my layout guide as a variable. I can just keep it as a constant. And because I'm not doing any caching now in the background, we get better performance. So what we're going to do in this episode is connect 2 wheels together. And first of all, we're going to create 2 wheels by transforming this layout guide right here. And we're going to create 2 others. So let's do that. And let's just set up a couple of constants. So we know that the radius is going to be the minimum dimension times 0.5. How do we know that? Because by default, when you lay out a polar layout in a rectangle, it takes the minimum dimension to be the size of the circle. You can change that in the layout configuration, but that's what it is by default. So the radius is going to be half of the minimum dimension of that rectangle. The next constant we need is how much we're going to offset this wheel. And we want to offset it by half the height. So we'll take the center of that circle and move it up to the top and bottom for the second one. So we'll say that the Y offset is going to be equal to half the height. Okay. And now we've got those 2 constants, we can make our first wheel. So G1 is going to be the layout guide we're interested in for the first wheel. And that is going to equal G with a Y offset of minus Y offset. Right, that should take it to the top. And then for the second wheel, we're going to say that G2 is equal to G with a Y offset of Y offset. That should take that to the bottom. That will take the center to the top and the center to the bottom. So what we actually want to do is say that the Y offset is equal to half the height minus the radius, like this. Okay, that should keep the circle within our shape. And now, instead of looping through this original layout guide, we want to loop through those two. So we say that our guides are equal to an array of G1 and G2. And then for each G in guides, we do that. And then to avoid confusion with this one, we'll say that that is the G base. All right. Just like that. So there you can see our two wheels. They are now disconnected, and you can see the overlay of our original layout guide of what it looks like there. But that's where our wheels are. Now what we want to do is connect these two things. And this is why I've got that second ring, because I'm going to put a circle at the coordinate 1, 1, which is equal to this point, which will translate to that point and that point. Okay, we're going to do that like this. Path, circle. And we want to say that the center of that circle is G1, 1. We'll give it a radius of 10. And now this is where the magic happens, because we can connect these two circles very easily. All we have to do is refer to points from one layout guide to the other, and it will all just work like this. We'll draw a line from G1, 1, to G2, 1, 1. And watch this. Look at that. Look at that. Our wheels are connected. And the real takeaway from this, and this is a crucial thing to recognize about layout guides, any points that you retrieve from them are just points. They're not associated with that layout guide in any way at all. It is just how they are generated. Once they're generated, you have your point, and it's just like any other point. So we can get rid of the border there. And we can get rid of the layout guides. You can create as many layout guides as you like without suffering any material impact to performance. So you could use them to create something like this. Now, I'm not saying this was a particularly simple design to come up with, but the components that make up this design are relatively simple in their own right. And I'll link to the gist for that in the description below. But here's a representation of the layout guides and how they drive that animation. And you can see it's all just layout guides referring to each other, and then you use those layout guides to draw your shapes. In this case, however, I'm not just drawing lines between things, I'm actually using points from separate layout guides to define the dimensions and transformations for layout guides themselves. Now that's a little bit beyond the scope of this tutorial, but if you do want me to do a tutorial on that in the future, let me know and I'll get right on it. So there you are, and I can't wait to see what you create. And if you think that's all there is to layout guides, well, you're wrong, because in the next episode, we're going to be looking at how you can animate different parts of the same shape in different ways. But that's impossible, isn't it? Well, yes, it would be without these techniques. So join me for that. It's going to be brilliant. If you like that, then give it a thumbs up. It really does help people find the channel and keeps me grinning like an idiot. And if you want to see more of this kind of content, consider subscribing, and you probably will. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them below. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me. See you next time.